Hello. It's good to be with you. My name is Michaela. This is Jasmine and Matt. I am the executive director of the Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary. And my friends, I'll talk a little bit more about who they are and what they do in a moment. But we are co-convening this panel with Darren Davis. Darren, it's so good to see you. I, through a comedy of errors, had a lot of flight things happen last night and didn't get to be in the room, but I heard it was beautiful. I feel very privileged to get to be at an IFL conference before you hand over the baton. And honestly, I'm just very grateful for your friendship. So thanks for having us. If you are looking closely at your program, you'll notice that we're down a person. Dr. Uli Chi, who is the board chair for a large health system in the Pacific Northwest, texted that he was feeling pretty sick and couldn't get on a plane last night. So if you are a praying person, please pray for him, pray for Uli. It also means that you're going to get a little more of me than originally anticipated. I tried to throw that right over at Jasmine and Matt, and they were like, no, you got it, you're good. So you're going to get just a little more of me and a lot more of them, okay? Let me talk a little bit about the Pree Center, then introduce my panelists, then introduce our topic, and give you a little bit in terms of my part. So the Pree Center for Leadership is at Fuller Seminary. Fuller Seminary is in the business, long-term business of training Christian leaders, particularly people in pastoral vocations and psychologists, okay? About 25 years ago, somebody somewhere had the good idea, what about all those folks who are never going to come to seminary? Does seminary have anything for them? Some of us might call these folks lay leaders. Some of us might call these folks people out in the marketplace. It was toward this group of people that the Pree Center was started. And our mission is really to help leaders respond faithfully to God's callings in all seasons of life and leadership. I never got to meet Max. He passed away before I came into this role. I'm the executive director there, like I said. And so I was very hungry for stories about him. Who was he? What was he about? What was he doing? And I heard stories that painted a picture of a person who sat kind of at the intersection of business, the academy, and the church. Right there at that intersection, which is actually what I would say, our panelists today, in their own ways, inhabit that same intersection. And I also heard stories of a man who was who he was wherever he was. So whether he was granddad playing with his kids in the boardroom, on the manufacturing floor of Herman Miller, he was who he was. And so at the Pree Center, we are trying to cultivate those same kind of leaders. As my friend Steve Garber would say, folks who are living the seamless life. And as I've gotten to know both Jasmine and Matt, really too, you all really feel like folks who are leading that same kind of life. So let me introduce you a little bit to our panelists. Jasmine, you might have the most interesting bio description of anyone I've ever met. I'm going to read it, and then you're going to correct me or add. You're always iterating too, so you're going to add in things if you want to. Jasmine is a love practitioner and a joyful disruptor who transforms culture and is shaped by a redemptive imagination. Ooh, that's a whole thing right there. Please come talk to her about all of that. Where does she do this? Jasmine's also a scholar practitioner. That's a theme that you're going to notice today in the way we talk and how we move as well, so just sort of be ready for that. She is the founder of Love 101 Ministries, which is dedicated to the theology and practice of love. She is also the vice president of merchandising, planning, and allocation at Reebok. She's got Reebok shoes on, just saying, looking good, and the head of Reebok culture. where you started this thing, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit more about this, called Courageous Conversations, which is a platform that engages issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and inspires that kind of transformation in community. In addition to that busy life and high portfolio, Jasmine is also being trained as a spiritual director and is a student in Fuller Seminary's Doctorate of Global Leadership program. Jasmine, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Matt. Dr. Matt Snowden. Matt is the pastor of First Baptist Waco here. How far are we? Are we stone's throw?
You can cross 35.
Cross 35. You've got a good arm as a stone's throw from here. Where you've been since 2010. And Matt and I were talking recently just how encouraging his tenure is in an age where, just for all kinds of very real reasons, people are like, oh, I can't, and I don't know if, and pastoral leadership is so hard. Matt, you feel like a real bright spot to me, and so thank you for that. Matt served 2 terms on the executive board of Texas Baptist, and he teaches pastoral leadership courses for Truett Seminary's Doctor of Ministry program, where you're also a graduate. Here we are in your alma mater. And take notes on this next part if you have not been taking notes so far. You have a brand new book out. Soul Culture, Stewarding the 5 Ingredients of Our Common Life. This is a really incredible book about congregational culture, about how to think about the reality of the community of people as having a particular kind of culture. And I'm just very grateful that you've written this book, and looking forward to folks picking up a copy. Okay, so we are here to talk about leadership in an age of discord. Darren, when you first asked me to take on co-convening this panel, one of the first things I did was I wanted to really make sure I understood what the word discord meant. I'm kind of nerdy like that. I'm like, what exactly does this word mean? And what are we trying to get after? And literally in the dictionary, discord talks about the disagreement between people. And for those of us, how many musicians in the room? We got musicians? Okay, yeah. Oh, I love all the young musicians. How incredible is that? That's wonderful. I am not a musician, and my husband is, but so he would correct me if my limited explanation. But there is a musical connotation here. It's the lack of harmony between different notes, right? The lack of harmony between different notes. And we can hear it. We can hear when there's discord. Well, that feels right. That feels just about right in terms of naming the context, Darren. And we don't have to look far to see discord. Literally, as I was sort of reflecting on these different places, I'm like, okay, painful denominational arguments and separations that we watch play out in a really vivid way. Institutions in the business world, education in the church, remember that intersection, academy, business, and the church. Institutions in all 3 of those coming under the microscope for racism, for sexism, for all sorts of things, and a variety of responses to that coming under the microscope. Political differences. My brother-in-law is a doctor turned pastor, which is a real interesting set of dinner time conversations. And my husband and 2 children and I were visiting their church in the Bay Area recently, and in the parking lot, I saw 2 cars, and they both had bumper stickers. First of all, I was like, that's interesting that we're doing bumper stickers on cars, but there they are. One was for Trump and one was for Biden. And I was like, whoa, just the differences that are coexisting, not necessarily somewhere out there, but in the spaces and places to which we belong. Add on to this the very real generational differences, right? I was just talking before this panel about ministry and work that is putting together boomers and millennials in conversation, and there's just so much good work to be done there. So layer on top very real generational differences and the accelerated pace of change. And the question starts to become like, where are we going? Like, where's all this going? And at the Pree Center, and with my friends here, we're asking, and what kind of leaders do we need for this moment. I will say, the Pree Center, we're in the business, we do a lot of non-degreed education, which means we get leaders coming in for cohorts or classes or things here and there, which means I'm exposed to a lot of different leaders. And so these are two anecdotal things that I've noticed. One, there is absolutely a crisis of leadership happening. It's absolutely. One woman, she said to me, Michaela, I just feel like my shoulders, like they're just putting more and more and more on my shoulders, and I'm just so tired, and I just want to be done. Can you help me just make it another year? I'm like, oh, that's tough. And we're actually seeing a lot of bright spots too. Like the news is not just bad. And I want to tell you a little bit about a project we've been doing where some of these bright spots are showing up. And this will start to link into our topics for the day. We've been engaged in a 2-year qualitative research project at the Pree Center. Our methodology really is to either leverage or do our own original research for the sake of converting it into resources that matter for real life and can be delivered through relationships. So for us, if the research isn't getting very practical and resource, like we haven't taken it far enough. But we've been engaged in a 2-year research project. We started with 18 focus groups, and we asked 93 marketplace professionals, what does healthy leadership look like? What does faithful leadership look like? What does fruitful leadership look like? And we got a whole bunch of responses. It was really fascinating. And then my very brilliant colleague, Dr. Merrill Hurd, took all that, made a lot of sense of it, and we had this list of 9 attributes that kind of came up. And then we sent out emails and did the different things you do to try to find people who kind of looked like this. Like, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so, do you know anybody that's kind of leading like this? Not perfectly, but at least somewhat. And from there, we got a list of another 90 people, and we went through that and, okay, let's make sure that we have the kind of representation that we need. Let's make sure we have different ages. Let's make sure we have racial, ethnic representation. Let's make sure people from different industries. And so we interviewed 35 exemplars. And as we've done this, we've realized that what we're doing, and we sort of realized some of this along the way, I'll be 100% honest about that, is we're actually studying what flourishing leaders look like. And I'm talking about flourishing as rooted in the science of well-being, and we could totally go there, and we're not necessarily going to today, but flourishing leaders. And there's a lot of things that are coming up, but I just want to name 3 of them here today, okay? 3 of them. And so when I think about, in an age of discord, with everything doing what it is, what kind of leaders do we need? These are the 3 things that we want to elevate today. First, these leaders are guided by a sense of calling. It was very, very clear. Interestingly, the calling was not to be a leader. The calling was to be a follower. These are Christian people, so the commonalities are a follower, a disciple of Jesus Christ. That was a very encouraging turn. Right? I even see some smiles in the room. That is an encouraging turn. So we'll talk a little bit. I'm going to talk, because Uli's not here, I'm going to talk a little bit about calling. Okay, so you get a little more of me. Next, they really were and are oriented by love, seeking the best for each other, but not at the cost of themselves. And Jasmine is going to talk to us all about love. Okay, we're going to each kind of describe these different attributes, and then we'll do some Q&A where I'll start with questions, and then y'all will be able to ask questions. Okay. And then finally, Matt. This felt like the right one for our tenured pastor to take up, no pressure. They developed the courage to lean into challenges, crises, and crucibles for the sake of the way forward. They feel called, they are oriented by love, and they develop courage to lean into challenges, crises, and crucibles for the sake of the way forward. I'm so glad that you get to talk about love and you get to talk about courage, because those are very big. Okay, so like develop your questions right now. We're just going to get to hear from them a lot. Again, so we're going to describe calling, love, and courage. I tell my students all the time, like, I am not the boss of theology. That's not how this works. So I would encourage you, as we're talking about these things, like mentally engage them. Think about them. Do they fit in your context? Do they need to be kind of bumped around? What would your tradition say? So just want to welcome that kind of engagement. Again, we'll do Q&A. I've prepared questions. Once I get done doing the calling portion, and then Jasmine and Matt do love and courage, I'll be a lot less vocal and we'll be asking questions here. I have given them permission if they want to rope me back into something they can, but I've tried to squeeze out of that part of it. And then you'll ask questions. So along the way, write your questions. What questions do you have? What's coming up? What do you want to know from these two people? These honestly beacons of business and the church, and very hospitable to each other, okay? Okay, so let me do just a couple minutes on calling, and then we'll go to love. So calling, again, it was very clear here that in the way the data came up, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about the data just in my own familiarity with it than these two will, but it came up that there's a very strong orienting framework. These are vivid and practical followers of Jesus, and they felt oriented by that call. And again, articulated over and over, it wasn't, I feel called to this role. We got some of that. It was, I feel called to follow Jesus. And that churn, if you hear nothing else I say today, that churn was really a big churn. The other thing that was interesting to me, encouraging to me, hopeful to me, I hope it will be to you too, is that these leaders, these followers, these disciples were absolutely made, not born. Absolutely made, not born. There's a lot of like leadership theory on traits and like things on leaders, and you could kind of go down that, we're not going to go down that track. We just saw here, I mean, it was just all over the place, different kinds of stories. We need all kinds of people to be leading in this age of division and discourse and discord. So to take that. Okay, now the theology of vocation. And we have some people in this room who are really excellent at thinking theologically about vocation. So I'm just going to kind of stand on their shoulders and offer a little something here, okay? Vocation is, it's a hard to understand concept that has been in many circles conflated with things, work, sort of the economic structure of our time, capitalism. That's not a knock on capitalism, it's just saying vocation gets conflated with it. Kind of a Western individualism, actually. So one of the things that I'll hear a lot from people in their 20s is, I don't want to talk about vocation. That feels like a thing for privileged folks. I'm like, oh, interesting. Like, let's dig into that a little bit. So it has been helpful for me to think about vocation with an image, because it is so complicated. And that image is a set of nesting dolls. A set of nesting dolls. So in the most core of the nesting dolls, I see the call to belong, right? This is the disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. This is John 10, the good shepherd and the sheep. This is Jesus saying, my sheep know my voice. Oh my gosh, someone just quoted it and said it with me. That makes me very happy. My sheep know my voice, and they follow me. No one will snatch them from my hand. This belonging. Now, to talk about belonging as central to vocation is actually to flip a little bit that Western economic conflation with work that says vocation is my one special job that I'm going to get paid for, and I've got to figure out what it is. And if I don't figure out what it is, what's wrong with me? And if that's not exactly what my culture says is primary how do I make sense of that? So that's just a flip, right? And so at the core, calling is about belonging and showing up as belongers. That's not a word, but let's pretend it is. Showing up as belongers wherever we are, whatever we do, whoever we're with. Okay? And that's the kind of calling that we heard in these interviews. I'm going to layer on a couple other layers. If it starts to feel mushy, just go back to belonging in your brain, because I'm going to say some other things, okay? And the most important one I want you to get is the flip on belonging. The next layer out is, I go all the way back to Genesis for this. Genesis 1, God's call to create. Right? God who makes the heavens and earth and separates the night from day, then says, let us make humankind in our image. Let them be fruitful and multiply. Theologians will talk about this as the creative mandate, the cultural calling, in its most literal sense. That be fruitful and multiply is the bearing of future generations. But it applies to really every sphere of our lives, including our work, including our leadership. And that, let's grab something from Martin Luther here, that creation isn't just abstract. It's in loving service of our neighbor, right? We could go to the story of the Good Samaritan, go to Luke 10 for the neighbor, but that creativity is toward the needs of others. Belonging, call to create. Here comes a big one. The call to participate in God's mission of redemption. Whew. Jasmine, you might just need to take this over, and it's shaped by a redemptive imagination. It actually is, and we've shared some conversations here, and our language is similar. Redemptive imagination, I think this is one of the distinctives of what it means to look and lead in a Christian way in these times, and to imagine these spaces of discourse and divide, and that there is another way, that the notes can sing together, that music can be made. Belong, create, participate in redemption, and then finally, when all those dolls are nested and set, that's when we get the call to particulars. A lot of us like to start with the particulars, and I get it, it's fun, what's the thing I'm going to do? I think the particulars make most sense, rooted in the rest of the picture. In fact, I think the doll would be quite hollow without everything that's inside. These leaders, what it means to lead, what it looks like to lead in an age of discord, I think we've got to get that calling piece. I really think we've got to get that calling piece right so that North Star is set. I think it's a calibrating reality. And then, of course, toward what? Right? And again, that's just a little bit on calling. Now we're going to move to love, then we'll move to courage, and those three together create a constellation. We're not trying to say this is like the whole picture of what leadership looks like in the age of discord. For that, we would need many, many years. But we do actually think that this can be orienting. This can be a framework. This can be something we can say, yeah, that looks like the story of Jesus Christ. And that's a thing we can train our students to, disciple our workers to, think about whether we're in fields of medicine or business or technology. So again, calling, love, and courage. And with that, you're going to get a lot less of me talking, and we're going to hear from Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Michaela. So many times as you were speaking, I was just saying amen, amen, over and over again. It's so good to be here. It's good to see all of you here. I'm grateful for Darren inviting us here. I'm grateful for Michaela for bringing me into this beautiful Trinity. I'm going to talk about what it is to love to lead to love in this age of discord. An East African creed of the faith states, showing meaning of religion is love. And I know there's a whole panel on Soren Kierkegaard, but he reminds us that it is love that connects the temporal and eternity. Dr. Krish Kandaya points to Christ's two natures as fully God and fully human as a pattern of life calling. The spiritual and the earthbound intertwined to show and share God's love. A pattern of a life calling to show and share God's love. I couldn't agree more with that. And it is the perfect frame for what it is to practice love. When I speak of love, it's important that I explicitly state that I am not referring to some sentimental emotion, but rather agape, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. defines as the love of God operating in the human heart. Love that is the most durable power, able to withstand wear, pressure, or damage, hard wearing. If we think about this age of discord, there's a bit of a dilemma. If love is that powerful, why then is love too often left out of our conversations about leadership? Leading with love in an age of discord is challenging when the opposition to love surrounds us. Fear, judgment, shame, isolation, oppression, injustice, violence, war, and death. People of faith are called to be love. Yet in a 2007 Barner study, respondents reported that Christianity in today's society no longer looks like Jesus. As a love practitioner, joyful disruptor, business and culture transformer, my particular interest is the metaphysics of love and its ability to transform humans and their contexts towards life and flourishing. That is the power of love. So from a theological perspective, my assumptions are built on the fact that God's nature is love. And I have an actual working definition that I'm sure will be refined during my doctoral studies, but I'm going to share it with you. My definition of love is an intentional response to the invitation to be the incarnational manifestation of God's nature and presence of Jesus on earth, and participation with spirit in the identification and acknowledgement of God's image and purpose in all beings and creation in a context without condition. So considering our theme, called together in an age of discord, what came to me was Jesus's farewell discourses in John 13 through 17. At the very end of his life and ministry, what was most important to Jesus? Akamaya Green Thompson suggests we find Jesus concerned first for the community that he leaves behind, for the quality of their life together, and for the witness they bear to him in the world. The life of the community is to be characterized, above all, by response to his commands, a response that is lived out in mutual love. Jesus, Emmanuel, who I assert is love with us, offers us a new commandment to love in John 13:34. We are wise builders when we put these words into practice. Matthew 7:24. And that means in our context, even the marketplace. How do we practice love in the marketplace is the question I get all the time. I offer my own contextual experience and expertise as an example of what leading with love might look like in an age of discourse. So just a little bit of my story. I have been in the business world for 30 years. And as Michaela mentioned in calling, in 2018, I sensed a calling to not a thing, but to love. Before I became a seminarian and a culture transformer, I was a student of love. Cultivating my own love practice, an intentional organization of my life in love, preceded my redemptive imagination. Not just, though, about my own life. Love is a communal practice. So a little of the context. Michaela shared that I'm a vice president at Reebok, a global footwear company. And at the murder of George Floyd, our company issued a commitment to be united against racism. And I was asked to lead change management toward that end. And I remember saying out loud, "Why are you asking me to do it?" And the Spirit said to me really clearly, "You know exactly why they are asking you to do it." And I want to just insert one thing at this moment. Dr. Amos Young, who is also here with us this week, I was a seminary student having a conversation with my dean. And I remember, I used to, at that point in time, have ministry. Love 101 had been founded. I was researching, I was working, I was creating this online community, a non-traditional way of ministering to God's people. And then I was working. But it was Dr. Young who said to me, "God is not going to waste 28 years of you in the business industry." And this question, this invitation to lead United Against Racism Change Management was the moment of convergence for me. It was the first time in my life that I came to work as my full, integrated self. So, being this joyful disruptor, I had this audacity to believe that love could not only just change the culture of my company, but we could be a light to the industry and change how the marketplace operated. So I invited love into my complex problem to solve how I would change my context. And because what I really sensed, it was a spiritual problem. All of these problems that we are dealing with, all of the discord is a spiritual problem. So I put love into practice and I confronted racism with love. So while Matt is going to be talking about being courageous, I created Courageous Conversations. And it was, I define it as a communal practice that cultivates collective transformation through gathering. Its power lies in creating proximity and in the power of narrative. We listened to each other's stories, and our hearts were changed. More than a mindset, working through discord is about a heart set. I think I created that word. I think. 3 years later, and 22 courageous conversations, love is still at work, transforming my context. I want to underscore a critical point. To lead with love at this kairos moment required that I use all of my gifts. This was the first time that I allowed myself to do that. So think about this. How many people are abandoning their faith at home or in the church and operating by the values and norms of the marketplace when they go to work? And I know some of you here are in the faith and work movement as well. I see it from the other side. When people walk in the door and move under a completely different level of beliefs to survive. Not only did I need courage, I needed a well to draw from. My love practice required that I tend to my own interior formation and spiritual transformation. Leading with love is an inside job first. The condition of our soul directly impacts the quality of our leadership. Love is a sanctification process where when practiced, we become more like love. I first experienced personally the cycle of suffering and grief and mercy and healing and forgiveness, and accountability and repentance, solidarity and grace, before I could have a heart to discern the spiritual root of the challenges we faced and sought to address. Loving myself unconditionally with my own imperfections gave me the capacity and the empathy to love others in theirs. What does it look like to lead with love? Consider this framework, which I'm also sure will change over time, for transformational leadership for starters. L, listen deeply. Look again, which is the etymology of the word respect. Richard Rohr talks about the second look. Look again. O, open to listen, open to difference, open to change, open your heart. V, be vulnerable. Value the Imago Dei in every person you encounter. E, empathy, emotional well-being, expand, evolve. The call to action for all of you is the call to love, to be love in your context. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't explicitly express that leading with love is daunting. We cannot love like this in our own strength. It is an invitation to become God-reliant and shift from being self-reliant. We desperately need divine help from the counselor and the catalyst, the Holy Spirit, who has the power to actually transform. It is in surrendering and yielding to the transcendent that the holy enters our context, making the impossible possible. I will close using the words of Howard Thurman as a prayer. As Michaela shared, I'm training to be a certified spiritual director, so I invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable to you, to put your hand on your heart if that feels good to you, as I recite them. May these words prayed over you be put into practice and provide strength as you lead with love towards life through this age of discord. Open unto me light for my darkness. Open unto me courage for my fear. Open unto me hope for my despair. Open unto me peace for my turmoil. Open unto me joy for my sorrow. Open unto me strength for my weakness. Open unto me wisdom for my confusion. Open unto me forgiveness for my sins. Open unto me tenderness for my toughness. Open unto me love for my hates. Open unto me thyself for myself. Lord, open unto me. Amen.
Do I really have to go now? Batting third with this group is kind of cruel. I feel like I'm about to preach after the altar call. And that's certainly, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. Darren, thank you so much for this and for all of these great conferences you put on over the years. I've been in this room with some of the great thinkers from around the world listening to the talk. So Michaela, I'm baffled that you would invite me to come into this place today, but I'm grateful and I thank you. I'm a pastor, so I'm about to do some pastor things. I hope that's okay. Of course, you've just done a lot of pastor things, and I've rededicated my life, and I promise again to tithe and everything else. One of my favorite quotes from Charles Spurgeon, the 19th century British preacher, is this one. He had time to mentor young pastors. He kept a vibrant ministry, very busy, but over the course of his years in ministry, he made space for the emerging generation of pastors. And he told them, he said, to be a successful pastor, one must have the mind of a scholar, the heart of a child, and the hide of a rhinoceros. I absolutely love that quote. What did he mean by his beautiful poetry? What did he mean by it? There's scholars in this room, and every scholar knows other scholars. And I think you would all confess today that not every scholar is wise. Please don't point fingers at the people around you. But we all know that when he said the heart of a scholar, he didn't mean just knowing things, having a bunch of stuff in your brain. When Spurgeon talked about the mind of a scholar, he meant wisdom. He meant walking in a sense of vocation. He meant understanding the will and the way of God and applying that in God's world for God's glory and for the good of other people. He meant wisdom. By the heart of a child, he meant love. Spurgeon pastored a lot of kids, and he loved every one of them, and he saw in them a life of love. Our church, we have a kids' sports league that we sponsor, and I'm a basketball coach for kindergartners and first graders. I coach the team with my son Wes, who is a high school junior. He's 6'3", he looks like a Greek sculpture, like a god. He's all district basketball. He knows basketball. He's great. He's great with kids. It's so much fun to coach with him. Me, I look more like Santa Claus. In fact, I actually literally played Santa Claus in this very room for faculty and staff children a few years ago. It was a great experience. Very weird, but a great experience. So I'm good with people. I'm good with wrangling people. So I'm the guy with the clipboard and the encouragement, and Wes teaches basketball. We had our very first practice this past week, and we're going around the circle. We're introducing ourselves to the kids, and they're introducing themselves to us, and they're telling their kindergarten or first grade what school they go to and all of this. And in the circle is a little girl named Brooklyn, and she's a full head shorter than everybody else in the circle, and she hasn't really said anything all night. Very, very quiet. And when we came to Brooklyn, she says, "My name is Brooklyn, and I'm pre-K." Now, technically, pre-K, you can be an infant and be pre-K. Just means she wasn't old enough for kindergarten yet, which means her parents falsified the documents to get her in the league. And, she was going to be too little to play, too young to play. And we were having a tough time a little bit with Brooklyn during practice, but at least a dozen times over the next hour after we introduced ourselves to her, I felt this thud on my hip. And I looked down, and there was the tiniest little girl on our team just grabbing a hold. She just had love in her heart, and in this world she wanted to show it. So when Spurgeon said the heart of a child, he meant a heart full of the love of God that was actively being expressed in the world. He said to be a successful pastor, you got to be not childish, but childlike. You have to be loving. And that last part of that, it's pretty clear. The hide of a rhinoceros, those things have big, thick hides. They're tough. They go into the bush and they fight for their lives. The hide of a rhinoceros. If you cross 35 and came to my study on the corner of 5th and Webster, there's a crash. That's what a group of rhinos are called. There's a crash of toy rhinos all around my office. Stuffed animal versions and wooden ones and carvings and clay ones, gifts from friends. And I have those all over my office to remind me of this quote and these three powerful truths and keys to pastoral success, which is wisdom and love and courage. I think of courage as the ability to endure difficulty and pain in the service of a great goal. And our great goal has been given to us by Christ, which is to seek the kingdom of God and its righteousness, to love Him and to love people for His glory. Tenacity, toughness, perseverance has been a mark of discipleship since the very beginning. In 1 Thessalonians 1, 2-3, Paul said, "We always thank God for all of you when we mention you constantly in our prayers. This is because we remember your work that comes from faith, your effort that comes from love, and your perseverance that comes from hope in our Lord Jesus Christ in the presence of our God and Father." His whole life had been steeped in this notion of perseverance in the service of God. He cut his teeth on the First Testament and the wisdom of the Bible. I love the line in Proverbs 24:16, "The righteous may fall 7 times, but still get up." Courage is not the ability not to fall. It's the willingness to get back up. And I think we're suffering of a crisis of courage. So often we feel like the little lady on the Life call commercials from a few years back. They were on television all the time. Do you remember this? The little button you push, she would declare very awkwardly, "I have fallen, finish it with me if you can, and I can't get up." So often we feel like we have fallen and we can't get up. As a pastor, as a parent, as a human being, I feel it and I see it all the time. I see it with seminary students from Truett. There's a program at Truett where students are assigned to ministers for a full semester. This is their whole semester, is that they're legoed to a pastor someplace, and they immerse themselves in ministry, and they reflect about what it's like to be vocational ministry embedded in a church. And several years ago, the very first student I ever had, we were about halfway through the semester, and we were in my office, and he looked at me and said, "Pastor Matt, I really think I'm burned out." This guy's like 22, 21. I almost laughed, and I'm grateful I didn't, because he was dead on serious. And I thought, how can you be burned out? You're not even kindled. He was started, but he was feeling down in his bones, and he was falling down, and he's just having a hard time getting back up. As a father, Meredith and my wife, we have 2 kids, Molly, Catherine, and Wes. Meredith's a public school, elementary school teacher. She teaches kindergarten. I remember when we were going through those pandemic days, everybody was saying how resilient the kids are, how resilient the kids are, how resilient the kids are. I noticed that a lot of people that were saying that didn't have any kids. A lot of times we told ourselves that so that we could make kids do things they weren't really built to do. As a teacher, Meredith every day deals with the challenges that came from that time with kids. As mom and dad, we do too. During the height of those days, we leaned heavily into some work by Kenneth Ginsburg, who is a pediatrician and a professor of pediatrics. He did a large qualitative study on resilient kids and teenagers. And he published his results, and he alliterated the whole thing. You're going to love this about it. You're going to love the alliteration. He alliterated the whole thing. He said, resilient kids and teenagers, there's something present in all of their lives. These things are present in all of these kids. And he said, this is what they are. He said, it's a sense of competence and confidence, sense of connection with others, a note of character. They feel like they can make a contribution, that they have coping skills and control. So it's competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. As I was reading Professor Ginsburg's work, I mean, Bible verses just started popping into my head. That's what I do. And I started attaching these observations with truths from our sacred text. And then there was a great sentence in his book. He said, of his Jewish grandmother, he said, it's wonderful from time to time when science confirms what your grandmother always told you. So all this stuff was rooted in the story, who we are. And as Christians, all these different aspects of toughness or tenacity or courage, perseverance, they take on a very particular flavor for those of us who love and worship Jesus. I don't have time to talk about all of them. I'll just give you 2 as an example. The first one is this idea of confidence. So often we talk about self-confidence, and that's good and rich and beautiful. But as you close out, what we have to lean into and live from is a God confidence that's powerful and real. Jason Isbell, who is an Americana singer, wrote a song, The Last of My Kind. And in it there is a line, Mama says God won't give you too much to bear. Might be true in Arkansas, but I'm a long, long way from there. I'm not sure that's even true in Arkansas. I've been there quite a few times. This idea that God won't give you too much to bear, does that really measure up against life? God? No, it seems to me there's evidence to the contrary. In our own strength, there's just like common stuff we're not too powerful to bear. In my own strength, I'm not sure I can bear Thursdays. But there's a beautiful promise in Scripture, and there is a beautiful hope. And it's found, friends, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Listen to these words. We do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly, unbearably crushed that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death so that we would not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. God won't give you too much to bear. Might get you over something. But there are things in life that it will just ring as hollow as a cave. There are sometimes we just have to say, I've fallen and I can't give up. And trust the one who raises the dead. So in our faith, self-confidence becomes God-confidence. And connection is not only connection to others, but the connection to God. Some of my favorite verses in all of Holy Scripture, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning in verse 5. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For it is God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. But just as we have the same spirit of faith that is in accordance with Scripture, I believe, and so I speak, we also believe and we speak. Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus Christ will also, with Jesus, raise us and bring us with him into his presence. Yes, everything is for your sake, so that grace that extends to more and more people may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. There's so many beautiful threads of connection in those verses. There's that powerful connection that the disciple of Christ has with God himself. That our life is for the sake of Jesus. That our living and our dying is for the sake of Jesus. That our service is for the sake of Jesus. That's calling. That's wisdom. That's life in this earth. There's a connection to God. There's a connection to our co-laborers in love and faith and hope. Paul said, we proclaim, we proclaim, we proclaim. Plural. We're in this together. We're not alone. We are not by ourselves. We have a family of faith all over the world. Different tribes and tongues and nations. But one family, one blood, because of the blood of Christ. There is a connectedness that we have to the people of God, and that should build in us some strength and some courage and some hope. But there's also this connection to the whole of the world. He said, we serve you for Jesus' sake, that grace may extend to more. That flowing out of this community of faith, flowing out of this church, flowing into the world from this group of people, the glad tidings, the message of God, the deeds and the words of the resurrected Lord in the earth, that they too may give thanks and glory to God, the author of life and the giver of hope. So yeah, we're called to courage, but not that kind of grit it out kind of stuff. We're called to a humble, chastened courage. That's faith in God, even when we have little faith in ourselves.
business and the church in conversation. I thought it's a fairly rare thing, and the two of you are bright spots, right? Bright spots. We're going to spend the rest of our time in Q&A. I'm going to ask one question, which is your cue to be thinking about your question. So I would love the next question to come from one of you. I know it takes, sometimes it's like, is my question the right question? It's the right question. Ask it, okay? They're ready for you. So thank you. I just so appreciate the tone and the tenor from which you both show up in the world. My question is, so we've given some stories and we've given a lot of ideas, but again, I'm the research into resources that matters for real life. And Jasmine, you said it well when you said that narrative has a particular power to do that. So what I would love to hear from each of you is a story of a time when you as a leader felt like you had to really lean in and pick just the love and the courage. And just, if you're willing, just tell us about that. And I don't care who starts.
Thank you for that question. And it's interesting because I think, as my life converged, I changed as a leader. So, but I'll use an example that actually caused me to lead with love and courage, because I think it more is reminiscent of what I see most often. Usually, it's something happens in a boardroom, in a team meeting, that becomes uncomfortable. People, well, they said, and you're going down this us versus them track immediately. And one of the things that came out of Courageous Conversations when we first began in year one is we created a set of behaviors that would then govern the way we all treated each other. They've changed since then, but at the time, they were open to difference, call in, not call out, and practice allyship. Those were our three behaviors. And initially, they were done specifically in this work around anti-racism. But what I came to know when our company was sold and then bought by another company, and I was I was the guard of making sure our culture continued, and that we transitioned into a new way of being, still very much who we were. Those same three behaviors guided us then too. So quickly, when you're becoming a new company and it's a new us versus them. Now the us versus them is the new parent company and us. And you can demonize them, all the things that isn't right about them, and everything that's great about us, or we could do that very, very easily. So this us versus them dynamic just shifted, but those behaviors still stayed true. And so there have been so many moments when love and courage looks like helping one of your colleagues off of that us versus them bandwagon and inviting them to open to difference, to call them in versus calling them out, and how I can practice allyship for them. And so, I remember having a courageous conversation once. A colleague and my team thought her team did something, and my team was very upset and was going down the bandwagon of them being wrong. And I went to my colleague, called her in, and we had a tough conversation. When we thought, we didn't think about that at all, and we did this, that, and the other, and I could share, well, this is how it landed. This is the impact that, and I get you didn't intend it, but this is the actual impact. And so now that we've put this all out here, how do we move forward together? And so when we had a courageous conversation shortly thereafter, and we had an example, like, anybody want to talk about an experience, whatever, with the values? And she raised her hand. She's like, I'd like to share our conversation. And so she shared this ability for me to call her in, to lovingly share a prickly situation, not run away from it, but be able to gain understanding from each other, and then be able to move forward together and bring our teams together through it too, right? It just happens it happens so quickly, so subtly, and really easily. But how can I not jump into the fray? How can I stand back? How can I be loved? How can I courageously ask the question that nobody really wants to hear and bring them in, call them in instead of calling them out?
That's great. Thank you so much. My story is about a friend of mine. He's one of my closest friends in the world. He's a pastor. In fact, we've promised to officiate one another's funerals. We just hadn't figured out how that's going to work. We're just a brother. And it's a story about I've fallen and can't get up in the way back for me. Got a call from his wife. This has been a couple of years now. One morning we had been talking about a basketball game we were watching together, and he kind of faded off during the second half. I didn't pay any mind about it. The game was getting sort of boring. In fact, he just nodded off, went to sleep. His wife called me. He's also a very dear friend, both my wife and me. And she said, Matt, Will's in the hospital, and I don't know what's going on with him. And there's nothing wrong with his heart. They checked him out, but he just sort of quit talking. Sat in the corner of the living room, just sort of quit talking. And we don't know what's going on. We think it's probably stress related. We're not sure. Don't really know how to talk to deacons about this, but somebody's going to preach Sunday. I said, I'll come preach Sunday. So I got on a plane, went to see my buddy, filled the pulpit at the end of that week for him. He'd just been living through the pandemic like we all had, and the discord in his church. They couldn't quite decide how they wanted to proceed on different things, but you have to do something. So there was tough times there. He had a kid that was about to graduate from high school. She was at college. They were foster parents. Her house was full of foster kids, some with very particular needs. And man, those shoulders, they were stacked up. And I don't know, the doctor could tell me what happened. I just say, he popped a spring. He couldn't talk anymore. And his road back has been a miraculous and beautiful thing. Just utterly amazing. And when you talked about love and leading with vulnerability, that's how he did it. Started with his wife's phone call to his old buddy, and just honestly receiving the resources that he needed, having the conversations that he needed, praying the prayers he needed to pray. He's sort of been my coach on this deal, because I think we're all about one boring basketball game away from popping a spring, you know, and we all need the road back, and it comes not through grit per se, but confession and openness and honesty, friends in the Lord, and good doctors and care. So that's my story. That's a hero to me. It doesn't look like the heroes we see in the movies, but I think that's a really heroic thing to do.
Thanks both for sharing the stories. We're going to go here now. So if you have a question, come line up at the microphone as well, please.
Thank you, all three of you. We can feel the depth and the richness and the struggles and the joys and all of your experience. I had 5 questions. I'm going to ask one, the quickest one. But I was doing my homework. But this one's for Michaela. In the study, you identified these 9 characteristics. They've identified these leaders who embodied much of those. My question is how conscious they're thinking about their own leadership behaviors align with your language.
That's a great question. There's a whole field of study on conscious leadership, right? I want to look at the data and bring in some, the team of people who have been analyzing this with me to speak assuredly. So you're going to get some Michaela reactions. People knew who they were, absolutely, but there was no up on a pedestal of self. You hear the way these two are talking. Like there's so much depth and wisdom, and then we did this, and they know how they move through the world, but it's not and then look at all these awesome things I did. That was a theme. So absolutely conscious, absolutely intentional, absolutely developing frameworks. Most of those came pretty hard earned. I'm not a psychologist, we have psychologists in the room, there's a lot of trauma that showed up, a lot of stuff, a lot of crucible moments. So yes, people are very conscious after a lot of working it out, and in that consciousness, not an elevation of self.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we navigate today, like in modern days and late modern days, if you will, is institutional life, right? So both in academy, business, and church, we are, and leaders particularly, are representing institutions. They're very complex. They have their own lives, own rules, own codes, and ways of being, and interests. So you are part of institutions that are kind of putting something forward to the world. So I'd like to hear from you guys, like how do you navigate that? The calling piece, the love piece, and the courage piece with each other relationally as part of complex systems and institutions that kind of demand as well from everybody. So I'd like to hear from you how you navigate that.
Thank you for that question. I mentioned that we created these 3 behaviors out of the first round of Courageous Conversations. They don't exist anymore because I was very deliberate about them moving from kind of this side space into this right square in the heart of the mission and the purpose of our brand. And so those, what were behaviors, are now a part of our brand values and our brand behaviors. And that speaks to what you're talking about, institutional values and behaviors and our ways of being. And what we've been able to do on that journey is take who we've been, the core of our DNA as an irreverent sport culture brand, what that has meant as the brand who started the Human Rights Awards over a decade ago, all of, that was very rooted in the streets of New York City, right? Taking all of these things, and how does that come together about who we are? And then based on who we are, who will we be? So the way we've structured them, it's we believe X, Y, and Z, we embody X, Y, and Z. And it is all tied to our mission as a brand to offer movement, which movement could be a movement meaning our physical bodies and wellness, right? So though all of those values and behaviors are all richly rooted in that, my lovely job as a senior executive of the company is to remind us. So one of the things in those values talks about freedom. That, when you are a love practitioner, it is your job to dismantle fear everywhere you go. And if you know anything about the marketplace, fear is baseline. Objectification is baseline. And love presses against all of that. And so I was very deliberate as an architect of these values and behaviors that we were literally upending the values of the marketplace in the values of who we say we will be. But the complexity also is that, yes, there's my brand, but there's our operating company, and then there's our ownership. And so for me, it's always navigating how we could be strong together in our little unit, but it's going upstream, right? And making sure. So I'm just really good about naming fear when I see it showing up. And it is much about what would love do in this context, in this particular situation. And so I always say love is a practice. What we practice, we become, because there's always these opportunities for us to keep trying. As I said, it's this sanctification process. And so I am painfully aware that the values and the beliefs and the norms of our owners that may not be quite where ours are, because we are in a particular place and a path, but I also meet them with love, not assuming that my goal is to dominate them into being love practitioners, that I'm also meeting them where they are, and then how is it that we can continue to move forward together. So I think that's the way I would answer that, and that it's complex. It's not like, oh, we're all here in this harmony. Like, It is the constant courage to still be loved, even when you might feel that you need to actually shift into survival mode, right? So it's a constant choice in everything that we do. So I hope that answers your question.
I think that's really instructive for me as a pastor. Josh Hayes is here. Josh, wave to everybody. This is Josh Hayes. Josh's co-worker at First Baptist Church. We wrote Soul Culture together as part of the Soundings Project coming out of IFL. And really, it's about corporate vocation, congregational vocation, and identity, and who we are as a church. When you were talking about those nesting dolls, I resonated with that as a pastor, because not only do individual Christians have that sort of vibe with the nesting dolls, but congregations have that very same thing. And I think you're talking about fear. So often churches today, I mean, where there's a crisis of decline everywhere, right? And fear gets in that system, and people just say, okay, what's working over there? What's working over there? What's working over there? And they end up like David in King Saul's armor, rattling around, and doesn't fit. It's not right. It's not who we are. And so that's not the right question to start with. What should we do? But that's quite often where a lot of times we start. What should we do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? It's an anxious question. What are we going to do? And the first questions are, who are we? What has God called us to? Who's God called us to be? And so there's this absolute goal that's fixed for the people of God, and that's to seek the kingdom of God. And the broad ambitions of each congregation pretty much given to us. They're fixed. And it's in those little concrete plans. It's how the particulars begin to manifest for congregations. It's based on where you are and who your people are, what your skills are, what your abilities are, the gifts that spread in that congregation. And you get to that last. It's not first. And so identity for a congregation is essential as identity for an individual follower of Christ. And fear is as real in the church as it is at Reebok. And nothing, Josh, there's a great quote from Burl Cain in the book. Burl Cain is a prison warden that Josh met doing work for ISR. And he often says, nothing stays fixed. That's a great sentence. Nothing stays fixed. You get something handled, and then you got to redo it. It just keeps popping up. And so tenacity and love and wisdom, you really can't separate them. They have to live together. And I hope that's helpful. That's a good question, man. Thank you so much for asking it.
Yeah, thanks, Gustavo. We've got about 5 minutes, so that's pacing for us. Probably one more question over here.
Hi, this is yourself gives you the capacity to love others. And first of all, I want to make sure that that's what you said, because I don't want to be putting words in your mouth. But I also was wondering, what are some scriptures that back that idea?
I love that question. So the interesting thing about love, if we start with love God, love neighbor as self, it helps us really remember that it's not, I think what happens oftentimes is we think of the other all the time, that we're not understanding where we're coming from. And so if I love me well, then I can actually love you well. But if I bypass the job of loving me well, then I likely can't love you so well. And so what I've also come to know is in that journey of loving yourself, you start to understand God in you. And so it really is predicated on the vertical relationship of your relationship with God. And as you are, like I would say this, it's first of all, I love the Trinity as a perfect example of perfect community, dancing together, right? I remember the moment I really understood unconditional love, the unconditional love that God has for me, is when I endeavored to unconditionally love another human and had heartbreak. And it made me understand the cross in a really different kind of way. Because I still love them, even though they broke my heart. And so this horizontal and vertical nature of love is what I'm talking about. It's all of those things together. But if we bypass, which this is like a cultural thing that's happening these days, right? If we spiritually bypass that I actually have to do the interior work of becoming my best self, then I'm actually going to shortchange other humans and I won't be able to be the presence of God very well in any context.
Thank you, Jasmine, for taking us, really to the Good Samaritan to end. It was sort of a groundbreaking moment, and this is fairly recent for me when, in maybe the last 10 years, when I realized, more often than not, I'm that person who passes by on the side of the road, but sometimes I'm the one that helps, and also sometimes I'm the one that's lying in the ditch. And to come to love each of those parts of ourselves and to make space for that takes real courage. I am just so grateful to the two of you. I'm sure you have lots to come and find them and ask them all the questions and do the things. Darren Davis, thank you. This is a real treat to be able to show up in this space like this, and you really set the tone for that. From me, from the Pree Center for Leadership, from Fuller Seminary to Baylor University, I really appreciate you. Thank you. Can we please give these two a round of applause?